Okay, well, welcome everyone to today's training. Today we have Madeleine Bair from El Tímpano. She's the founding director of El Tímpano, and it is a participatory reporting lab designed with and for Oakland, California's Latino and Mayan immigrant communities. Today, Madeleine will take us on a deep dive into information needs assessments. He will also outline the importance of looking at information needs through a lens of equity to gain trust. And after touching on community mapping, you'll have a chance to draft and share the start of your own community needs assessment survey. With that, I'll turn it over to Madeleine.
Hi, y'all. Thank you so much, Matt. Really good to be here with you all for a very short time to talk about one of my favorite things, information needs assessments. I hope you will leave this workshop as excited as I am about information needs. Let's see, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. Okay, great. And I would love to know who you all are. Because it's a short time frame and there's a lot of you, I invite you to utilize the chat to introduce yourself, tell me about where you're from, where you're coming from. And also throughout the hour and change that we're here together, please utilize the chat to ask questions or just like share observations or exclamations. And I have a lot to share, but I also really want to hear from you. So also feel free to go off mute. And we will have a few breakout opportunities for you all to share with each other and as a larger group. So please don't hold back if you have a burning question or feedback or story that you want to share. A little bit about myself. As Matt said, I'm the founding director of El Tímpano here in Oakland, California. We're expanding to the wider Bay Area. And I have been involved in a few information needs assessments that I will share with you. And what else is there to say before we jump in? Yeah, this could easily be a full day workshop talking about information needs assessments. This here is only going to be about an hour and 15 minutes or so. I hope you can stay for the whole thing. But I really hope it is enough to help you get started, work through some questions that you may have, provide some examples and ideas, and also really help create this cohort because, well, I hope you will get a lot from what I have to share. There is a lot of expertise in this room, and as so many of you are embarking on your own information needs assessments, my hope is that we can also just help build relationships among this group so that you can be great resources for one another as you do that. Matt, I see there's 2 people in the waiting room. So my hope is that you will walk away from this workshop with an understanding of how to conduct an information needs assessment, with a particular focus on understanding information needs to prepare your newsroom to respond to a crisis or to support your community in responding to a crisis. Also, with really an understanding of how to design your information needs assessment plan with an equity lens. You will also walk away with a start of your own information needs assessment plan, or maybe you've already started that, so we can just kind of help expand on that, interrogate that a little bit and get some support through that. And then, as I mentioned, peers that you can continue to utilize as a resource as you are going through this together. I also can't see the chat right now. I will stop my screen at a few points through this. So if there are any burning questions in the chat, please, Matt, let me know, or anyone else, again, just feel free to go off mute. All right. Again, the cohort is your greatest resource. So please do what you need to be present, stand up, stretch, grab some water. I see some of you are already doing that. Excellent. Yeah, I already went through all this. Great. So we're actually going to start with a short breakout into pairs. I imagine that you all have at least a very basic sense of what an information needs assessment is. So, and I think it would be really helpful to, as we go through the next hour plus, to really have that in mind. So we're going to break you into pairs and just share with your partner, what do you want to learn from the information needs assessment that you are planning? And how do you envision it shaping your organization's work? Two simple questions. Of course, please introduce yourself. And yeah, take it away. Take it away, IT. Do that.
Hello.
Hi, Matt. All right, great. Thank you. I'd love to actually just hear from one or two people. Does anyone want to share super briefly what you're hoping to learn from your information needs assessment? There's got to be rapid fire. Do I have a volunteer? Anyone?
I'll go. I don't cover a beat topic as much as I do landmass as the rural and small communities reporter. So we're looking for a lot of different things across agriculture and healthcare and whatever else we can find. And I think the thing I'm most interested in is finding stuff that people can feel not committed to, but like can feel like they can be proud to be a part of in terms of our coverage, stuff that people will want to see covered in their community and want to be actively participating in that coverage of, kind of hopefully creating a more collaborative environment and more trust as a result.
Great. Thank you for sharing, Adam. Anyone else? Going once, going twice?
I have a,
Oh, Jennifer.
I'll just say I have a really basic and short one, but I think it's one that a lot of people share, which is like, I want to know what people need to know, if that counts.
That counts. Great. And was there one other person who wanted to share? Was that Natalie?
Yeah. Hi, Madeline.
Hi.
Yeah, so with our WhatsApp newsletter at KUNR, I think it really comes down to wanting to know where people are currently getting their news and where they want to get it. So that's a big part of it.
Excellent. Great. Thanks for sharing. All right. I'm going to share my screen again, but I can't see it anymore. Give me 1 second. Okay. All right, we're going to do this. Okay. All right, here we go. So, all right, great. So let's talk information needs assessments. An information needs assessment is pretty simple. It really comes down to exactly what some of you all just said. It is a process of understanding what is the information that people need, and what is the best way of getting that information to those people. Really the objective from the point of view of us as journalists, as newsrooms, is that by having a clear understanding of what is the information that our communities need, we can be responsive and provide the information that is valuable to them. So we're not just determining based on our own expert news judgment what our communities need, but we're really basing that on hearing it from those communities themselves. There's actually another term that is used that I really appreciate, rather than calling this an information needs assessment, an information ecosystem assessment, which from my point of view is a bit more of a holistic understanding and more of an asset-based framework of thinking of what, not only what are the information needs, but what are the information assets that exist in the community? How can we also build on those assets or connect the dots? So I just want to introduce that and offer that as another way of describing this process that you're undertaking. Just going to share briefly one example of an information needs assessment that was also very general. My news organization, El Tímpano, we started with an information needs assessment. We didn't do anything. We didn't create a website. We didn't create our mission before going out to our target audience and ask them, what do they want in Spanish language media? So the objective of our information needs assessment was understanding what Oakland's Spanish-speaking immigrants want in local news. Very broad. This is one example of what that looked like. We created a very simple survey. You could see that on the right, and it just asked in Spanish, what are the issues that are most important to you? And where do you find information about those issues? Excuse me. And then on the back of it, it also asked, if you could change one thing about Spanish language media, what would you change? So super simple, super broad. And we took this to a lot of different spaces to bring it to community members, to bring it to our target audience of non-English speaking Latino or Mayan immigrants. So this photo here was taken in a church cafeteria. Oops. Some of the key findings after talking to about 300 community members through that survey, through group workshops, through other methods that I'll talk about a little bit more in a second. Some of the things we learned was that health was the #1 issue from our target audience. After health, there was housing, jobs, public safety, and immigration. So, that understanding after surveying hundreds of community members has shaped our editorial priorities. A few of the other things that we found is that people want news you can use. So people said, like, I want information that will help me sign up my kids for summer classes, or, understand how to sign up for medical access. So people said they want information that helps them take action, that helps them learn about local resources, and that helps them be involved really in their communities. Another key finding is that we heard many community members don't use computers. A lot of people told us they don't have a home computer, they don't use internet, they don't use email. Super key finding, because that tells us, okay, maybe a website is not the best strategy for meeting this community's information needs. Maybe an email newsletter is probably not the best approach. And so that has shaped our distribution strategies. And that's why text messaging is El Tímpano's core approach to distributing actionable information. So just a really quick overview of how El Tímpano used an information needs assessment to help shape our editorial priorities and distribution strategies. And I can't see the chat, so if you have any burning questions, feel free to unmic yourself.
We have a question here from Adam. Is that card survey the sort of thing that could be successful? Oh, just bumped up on me. That could be successful at the mailer. Do you think, or does getting it face to face work better?
Sorry, I cut off for a second. It's about this. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just wondering if that card like that survey, it looked like was like a postcard, right? Like front and back.
Mm-hmm.
The sort of thing that was it given face to face, or was it done as a mailer, and is one more successful than the other?
Yeah, great question. And this goes to a bit more of the nitty gritty of how we did that. So it was initially, the initial design of our survey was like a 5-page survey. And the first time we went out and utilized it in person, we realized that it took like 20 plus minutes to actually go through the survey. So it was pretty laborious, both for our team and for any community members that we wanted to participate. So it's always good to do a test run. But it's also really good to like share these processes with community members, community leaders. And so we actually shared that survey with a library branch manager who has become a supporter of El Tímpano, wanted to support this process. And he gave us some really valuable feedback, one of which was just like, cut it down. Don't include so many personal questions. And so that's why we wound up making it a super short, basic, very easy to engage with survey. In terms of the actual distribution itself, all of it was in person. You can try flyers. You can certainly try other approaches. If your target audience is online and you do have a way of reaching them through emails or through social media, then those could be perfectly accessible or perfectly valid as well. But I will say that one thing that we really appreciated about conducting these surveys face to face is that we got so much insight, not only from the surveys themselves, but also from the conversations that they would provoke. So in some ways, the surveys was really like an invitation for a conversation. And a lot of people were so interested in having a conversation about, what local news could be, that they shared with us like examples from their hometown in Mexico, or just kind of other ideas that weren't necessarily on the survey. And then the other thing is that it just helped build trust with the communities that, that really were our target audience. So those were kind of other objectives and results of that process as well.
Thank you.
Sure, great question. So a little bit more about the methodology. So surveys are one way to really get at the questions that your information needs assessment is getting at. It could look like a greeting card, and again, it could look like an online survey. There are WhatsApp surveys that you can do these days. If you already have a text messaging audience, it could be a text messaging survey. So surveys are one method, but not the only one. Something else that we used with El Tímpano are workshops. So we really facilitated them as workshops. You could think of them as focus groups or listening circles. So this is a picture from another example I'll share in a minute. But we facilitated conversations with people going into the same questions about, what is the information that you're looking for? Where do you get that information? And facilitated conversations in small groups and then a discussion. And that's one way at getting kind of a bit more in depth into the issues that, beyond just a checkbox. And then also just conversations, one-on-one conversations, with community members, with community leaders. So as part of El Tímpano's information ecosystem assessment, I sat down with about 24 community leaders, including church pastors, the library branch manager I mentioned, directors of community health clinics, to hear from them, how do you reach the communities that you serve, and what do you see as some barriers and opportunities? What do you see as the main issues of importance to the communities that you serve? And then finally, ongoing engagement. We do think of an information needs assessment as one discrete kind of in-depth process, but information needs are always evolving. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And so I just want to acknowledge, your news organization may already have other ongoing community engagement methods, which can be utilized, particularly if things are changing in a rapid pace. If there's a sudden crisis or emergency, that's a great way to utilize the tools that you already have at your disposal to really kind of keep tabs on how people's information needs are changing. So, whether that's a WhatsApp platform or a text messaging platform or Hearken, or a community advisory group, these are other ways to keep a pulse on the evolving information needs of your community.
In the chat, Maria had a question about that event that you hosted and how you got the word out, and where did you host them at?
Yeah. I will. I'm just going to put a pin in that question, and I will get back to that when I get more into the case study that is from, if you don't mind. Any other questions about these methodologies? Great. So a few things to keep in mind. Information needs are not stagnant. So my information needs changed dramatically when I became a mother, or, my information needs today are different from my information needs during a wildfire. So they are really context specific. Information needs also vary from one community to another. And so what that means is that there will not be a one size fits all approach to addressing the information needs of a diverse community. So when you are designing an information needs assessment, you really want to keep in mind, who is it that you want to hear from? And that gets to the question that was just posed, is how are you going to hear from those communities? So we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. So who do we want to hear from and what do we want to know? So I'm going to share just one other case study. This is the other information needs assessment that I was involved in partnership with the organization Internews. And this took place after wildfires in the North Bay, what we kind of know as wine country here, in Napa and Sonoma counties in 2017. And what happened during those massive wildfires is it became very clear that Latino immigrants who primarily worked in agriculture in that region lacked crisis information during those wildfires. And so several months, maybe like 6 months to a year later, Internews partnered with a few local organizations to conduct an information needs assessment with the objective of understanding how crisis information served or failed to serve Latino immigrants during those wildfires, as a way to really understand how information systems can be better designed in the future for the next crisis. So we kind of took the greeting card surveys that we had used from El Tímpano and created an iteration for this. This is an example of us setting up at a summer festival with signs that said, "Were you affected by the 2017 wildfires? We want to hear from you." So we conducted surveys. We also facilitated group workshops. And we asked, what was your main concern during and in the immediate aftermath of the fires? Where did you look for information? Where did you find information? What were the challenges that you encountered in seeking the information that you were looking for? And where do you get news and information? And some of the things that we learned, most people, and again, we were really targeting Latino immigrants in this information needs assessment. Most of them said they had no source of information during and in the immediate aftermath of the fire. As a result, a lot of people told us like they didn't know that there was a crisis center close to them when they were looking for one. They didn't learn that until much later. The power and cell service had gone out. Nearly all of the crisis information available was only in English. There was a county emergency alert system, but most people didn't know about it until the crisis. Some still didn't know about it a year later. And a lot of information was shared at the crisis centers, but again, because people didn't know about those centers, or because of rumors that of ICE presence at those crisis centers, they didn't go. And then in terms of where people did get information, there was a small local Spanish language radio station that was really in some ways the only Spanish language source of information during the crisis, but because of its small range, it only served people in a certain area. A lot of people told us that they were going to English language news sites and just getting what they could from them, even though they didn't speak English fluently. Maybe they would have their kids translate. And then, of course, we learned what was some of the most critical information during that time. So shelter information, just crisis information, financial and health information. I haven't forgotten about that question. And that gets to this point, before we have a breakout for you all to work on your own information needs assessment plans. I do want to talk about diversity of information needs and equity and inclusion in information needs assessments. Again, information needs vary from one community to the next. And as we all know, particularly in a crisis, it's the most marginalized communities who are likely to be the most impacted. And so what does this mean? When designing and conducting an information needs assessment, it's really important to be intentional about whose information needs you're assessing and plan your outreach and implementation accordingly. And this is really where I tend to see the most well-intentioned information needs assessments fall short, is because this is actually what takes the most time, is developing those relationships, identifying the communities that you really want to reach, because it's often the ones that you don't have the relationships already with. So it's perfectly fine to go to your primary audience to conduct an information needs assessment. But you have to realize that that's only a certain fraction of your community, and it might be the parts of the community that is not the most impacted during a crisis. So to the question that someone asked in terms of where we facilitated those group workshops, we partnered with a number of community organizations that serve Latino immigrants. And this, again, this is the part of the process that took the most time, both in the North Bay and here in Oakland, for El Tímpano's information needs assessment, was really just identifying who are the organizations, who are the institutions, who are the community leaders that we will need to build relationships with so that we can hear from the community members that they're reaching. So that's why, as a part of the information needs assessment that I led here in Oakland, it really started out by talking with community leaders and sitting down with them, hearing their thoughts on the information needs of Latino immigrants, but also as a part of that, really building a relationship so that then they would open the doors to El Tímpano to, bring our survey to their church service or to their library lobby. Or carve out space in their meeting so that we could facilitate a group workshop to talk about information needs. And that does take time because, you have to be in someone else's calendar and, take the time to have those one-on-one meetings to build relationships, and identify whether that is something that aligns with their own goals and objectives. Yeah, I'll pause there because I just went through a lot. Any curiosities, questions, observations?
I believe you said this earlier, but I might have missed it. How many people were involved with this effort initially?
Are you talking about the one in Oakland or in the North Bay?
The one in Oakland.
So are you talking about El Tímpano's team or the community members?
El Tímpano's team.
Yeah. So it was pretty much myself. And then along the way, and this was because I was doing this in the community. So, started to build relationships with community members. Along the way, community members like stepped up and said like, hey, this is really neat what you're doing. Like, how can I be a part of this? And so I kind of built a small team while I was doing that supported a lot of the in-person outreach, but it was primarily myself.
And before you had that small team, were your plans different? Did you expand your plans with that small team at all?
No, I mean, I think the plans kind of expanded organically, just in the way that if you're a journalist and you set out reporting a story, you will have an idea in your mind at the start what that story is and what it involves. And you will learn along the way that it's something much broader, more nuanced, and it will evolve. And so our information needs assessment evolved in the same way because, we met community leaders who expanded our ideas, and the library branch manager provided great feedback. The plan initially was actually really just focused on Latino immigrants, but I quickly learned more about Oakland's large and growing Indigenous Mayan community. And one of the people who became a supporter and collaborator of the project was a Mayan leader who helped build relationships with Mayan church pastors so we could reach the Mayan community. So it did evolve in that way. And I think, you should expect your plans to kind of expand and evolve as you learn more about the communities that you're reaching.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I think the next step is before we go into that, I just want to remark on community mapping. We don't have enough time to really get into this, but one of the resources that Matt will share with you later is a resource from the News Voices program at Free Press, which has a great guide, actually a few great guides on incorporating strategies of community organizing in your work. And one of those strategies is called community mapping, which is really a way of just identifying, what are the different communities that exist within my sphere, and whether that's like communities by age, by ethnicity, by neighborhood, by industry, and I really encourage you all, as you are creating an information needs assessment plan, to really just like take a pen and paper and map out who are the communities that you're trying to reach. What are some institutions within these communities that you might want to build relationships with? What are some parts of the communities that you or your station just doesn't really have good relationships with, and where it might take more effort on your part to build those relationships so that you can actually reach the community members that you want to reach as part of this. So I just want to kind of plant that seed of an idea, and you will be followed up with a resource that has a little bit more about community mapping. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you and give you about 20 minutes to draft an information needs assessment plan. We're going to break you up into groups of 3. And what I'd like you to do is just take the first 5 minutes. You could keep yourself on mute. Just take the first 5 minutes solo to draft a plan. And that draft could involve, what are the questions that you want to ask? What methodologies do you want to use to ask these questions? And who do you want to reach, and how will you reach the communities that you want to hear from? So take about 5 minutes to do that on your own. And then we'll give you about 15 minutes to discuss as a group, and just listen, ask questions, And then we'll come back and have a little bit of time to discuss as a larger group. Any questions before we send you off? All right, great. Have fun. I'll see you at the top of the hour.
Hey, I'm on my way. Are you still going to be there for a couple minutes?
Yes. All right, we have about 10 minutes for a nice group share back and discussion. So I'd love to hear, how did that go? Any aha moments, any inspiration that you got while talking this through and hearing others talk through their plans? Anyone want to share anything with the group?
I was interested. I was with Natalie, and it was very interesting to hear kind of the infrastructure behind some of the work that they're doing around Spanish language. And here in Maine, we've got a project that's tackling 4 languages at once, which makes it great that it's so diverse, but also kind of a bugbear to wrap your head around, because each group might want different things in terms of priorities. And Ari and Miles are only a few guys working on this, so but it's anyway, it's just helpful to hear kind of how others are approaching.
Yeah, and I'll just on that note, Mark, maybe you want to share a little bit about like the listening sessions and how you are kind of working in 4 languages at once. I found that interesting.
I don't want to speak for Miles and Ari, who are actually the ones doing it, but I know they're going out and trying to ask sort of a standard batch of questions to these different groups, and it's small groups they focus on and individuals, and they're sort of tracking what the feedback is. I don't know if Ari or Miles wants to supplement here, since they're doing
Yeah,
it.
it's kind of like you mentioned, Madeleine, with the existing community organizations and folks that are already doing work in the immigration space, identifying community leaders within those nonprofits. And yeah, Ari and I are doing engagement with them with the hopes that that will network and build our relationship, build trust, such that they can help us distribute the program into these different language-based communities.
Great. Thanks for sharing. Anyone else want to share what you learned from your group or what you shared within your group?
I appreciated what Adam said about trying to meet people where they are doing outreach. Madeleine, as you had also talked about, tabling at different events with the understanding that like everyone is pretty busy like all the time, and a lot of the community leaders and community members that we're trying to reach, like it's not always easy for people to take time out of their day to talk to us. So like to the extent possible, showing up at pre-planned events or even just locations, supermarkets or wherever, where people are already going to be. So you're not asking like an extra favor of them to talk to you.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. Yeah, people are really busy. So I think that's probably like the #1 tip I give to folks is just meet people where they're at. And as you all were in your groups, I was checking out some of the questions and feedback that came in the chat, and wanted to respond to one that was also just about a question about like the length of time that it took to build relationships and like get people to come to these workshops. I think the approach again kind of goes back to really borrowing from the ethos of community organizing. And one of the objectives of community organizing is to really build relationships and through those relationships, identify shared goals, and then working together towards those shared goals. And so if you frame your information ecosystem assessment, and not just framing it externally, but really framing it authentically as wanting to better inform your community or wanting to, have the information and insight and data so that you as a news provider can better provide the information for your community, it is more likely to overlap with the goals of the communities that you're trying to reach than, and with the goals of potential partners, then if you framed your information needs assessment as like, my organization is doing this initiative, and for this initiative, we need to hear XYZ from XYZ community. You understand the difference? And so like, how can you frame it more broadly, and even like share out the results to your partners? So actually, when this was another way that our information needs assessment in Oakland expanded, was in talking to community leaders and sharing with them like what we were planning to do. A lot of them said to me like, oh, I'm really interested. Like, I would love to hear what you find. And so we weren't actually planning to really publish our, what we heard from our information needs assessment, but we wound up actually publishing a big report, sharing out all of the insights that we learned so that it could be valuable for other partners, and for the community as a whole. And we saw that it really has been a valuable resource for community partners. So just thinking of different ways to create your plan, design your plan, design the implementation so that it can be of value to the wider community. And I think that will go really far in helping you build these relationships and just get buy-in from potential partners who can then, help you through this process. Anyone else want to share or any other questions about this?
I just want to say thank you for bringing up postcards, because it's something that hadn't even crossed our mind. We're so into the digital and things like that. And even if you do in-person meetings, it just hadn't even been on our radar. So thank you. We talked about this a little in our breakout too.
Awesome. Yeah.
One thing I was just going to say that I thought was helpful is, another project I'm thinking about has a very broad potential topic, and I feel the need to really narrow it down. And it feels like an information need assessment could really help do that. And I'm thinking about it not just in terms of audience, but potential geographic area, So anyway, I just thought that was a really helpful thought.
When you talk about how you're using text messaging as like a primary driver of your delivery service because you learned from your needs assessment a lot of people weren't using the internet, could you elaborate on what kind of stuff you're doing via text?
Yeah, so we're essentially a text-first newsroom. So text messaging is our primary platform for sharing information, and information that people told us they need, and for inviting people to participate and share back their questions and their stories. So El Tímpano sends out usually 2 messages per week, each focused on one particular issue that community members told us is of interest to them. And we provide actionable information. Again, going back to what we heard is people want news they can use. So actionable information, and then we invite community members to respond with what could be like, what other questions you have about this issue, or how have you been affected by this issue? So it really creates this feedback loop between our organization, our newsroom, and the audience that we serve.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I've got another question for you, Madeleine. With these information needs assessments, in your case, at what point did you determine that you had enough respondents or results? Like, looking at population, what does that look like?
Yeah, good question. And someone actually asked me this recently, and I couldn't actually think of the answer. It's now been like about 4 years since we did bring it to a close. And I don't know if we just ran out of money or what, to be honest. Yeah, so I wish I had a better answer for you. I can say we, on the whole, we talked to 300 community members and 24 community leaders, and we analyze all of the responses of the surveys and of group workshops. And, it certainly came to a point where like the more people we asked, it just confirmed what we already found. So it felt like, okay, we have a really good understanding now of the information needs of the communities that we want to serve. But that said, it is really an ongoing an ongoing process. So like that formed a real foundation for our work and our strategies. But we realized that again, like information needs evolve. There are communities within the communities that we serve that, have distinct information needs. So for instance, we spent a small grant last summer doing a bit more of an information needs assessment, particularly with the Indigenous Mayan communities who subscribe to our text messaging service, with an understanding that their needs are specific and distinct from those of the wider Latino immigrant audiences that we serve. So we really like to, just think of this as an ongoing process, and through our text messaging platform, just always be listening to hear how the information needs of our audience may be changing.
Thank you.
Yeah. Great. Any other final questions or feedback or curiosities that you have before we wrap?
Madeleine, this is Steve Berger, WNIN. Besides the text messaging service, and by the way, what service do you use for your text messages?
We use a service called Zingle.
Okay. Besides that, have you looked at any other apps, or are you hearing that, for example, some other apps are becoming more popular in the community and considering using those?
Yeah, text messaging works really well for us. That said, based on this assessment of our Indigenous Mayan audience, we're planning a new strategy that uses more the metaverse of Facebook and potentially WhatsApp as well, so that we could produce social video. And because that is kind of the main challenge or limitation of text messaging, is there are limitations on the sort of media that you can share through text. So it's, our text messaging is very basic. It's mostly just text, and that's it. Because if we add, graphics or videos, then it will be flagged as spam. So that's just kind of more of the technical details of the platform. So we are considering more use of social media, so that we can better reach low literacy communities.
Thank you. And congratulations, by the way, on all your success over the past few years.
Thank you. Great. Well, thank you so much. Unless there are any other burning questions, I've really enjoyed this. And as I mentioned, I've shared with Matt a few follow-up resources. So he's going to share, there's some blogs that El Tímpano has written about our process and our approach, particularly our approach to conducting an information needs assessment. As well as some fantastic resources from Free Press about incorporating strategies and tools of community organizing into your work. And also one other thing that I didn't mention is the Listening Post Collective playbook. The Listening Post Collective, if you're not familiar with them, is this, it's a capacity building organization, an initiative of the organization Internews that has really great resources on listening to the communities that you serve to develop news to meet their needs. And El Tímpano actually worked really closely with the Listening Post Collective as we designed and implemented our information needs assessment. So I am a big fan of their tools and the playbook that Matt will share with you. So with that, I hope this has been helpful and that you continue to refer to those resources and all that we've shared, and that you all keep in touch with each other because, again, it sounds like there's already been a lot of great inspiration and sharing just among this group. So feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. I'm Mad Bair, and I'm excited to see all and hear all what you all do for your communities. And this has just been a pleasure to share and discuss with you. So thanks again, and thanks to the team at America Amplified.
Thank you, Madeleine, and thank you everyone for sticking with us today. I will definitely send out those resources and the recorded training either later today or early tomorrow, so keep an eye out for that. Otherwise, have a good night.
Bye.